Welcome to the Classical Gabfest, a weekly discussion about the ever-changing world of classical music. I'm your host for this week, William White, and with me as always are Tiffany Liu and Kensho Watanabe. This week we'll be discussing another interesting move by the San Francisco Conservatory. Then we'll look at a video compilation of the worst classical performances of all time. And finally, we'll talk about the intersection of institutional classical music and social media. But first, we like to start with our prelude segment. So, Kensho, what do we have today?
This week, we'll be playing a round of everyone's favorite game, Who Dis? John Sibelius famously said, "A statue has never been set up in honor of a critic." And indeed, some critics have gotten it famously wrong. This game, as we now play it, works like this. I will read a number of YouTube comments about a piece of classical music, and it will be up to my co-host to guess what piece is being referenced. All right. This is always fun. I found some great stories that people wanted to share about their associations with pieces, and I find those to be the most entertaining. So
rarely the most elucidating, however.
I know. I try to help you out, though, as we go.
But they're great. Oh, no. Hey, don't get me wrong.
All right. Here is the first piece being referenced on YouTube. Here we go. During the 30-year civil war in Sri Lanka in the 90s, we had no TV, no electricity, and no food. But as kids, we used to collect old batteries and operate a small radio and would wait till they played this song at 9:55 p.m. every night before the local news. The war is now over and the country is peaceful, but nothing can take away the memories this song brings. Song, not piece, of course. While listening to this, I remember dead bodies and cries of a million people. I never knew the name of the piece, neither the name of the composer, and neither did I know the song was 400 years old. Thanks to YouTube, I found the piece after 30 years.
Well, this actually has a surprising amount of information in there. Namely that it's a 5-minute long piece and that supposedly
400 years old.
It's 400 years old. I have my doubts about that.
It is a YouTube comment after all.
Right, exactly. Yeah, this is not always the best with history.
But I doubt that it would have been said if the piece were, say, 100 years old.
Yeah, like maybe Baroque, I think that we would be sort of comfortable saying. A Baroque 5-minute long piece that presumably was played every night at the same time? Is that correct, Kensho?
It said, yep, 9:55 p.m. every night before the local news. I mean, there are two other comments we can go to, you know?
Yeah, let's have one more.
Okay, yeah. I guess we've gotten as much out of this one as we're going to get.
Here we go. My gosh, this is my childhood. The daycare I went to was connected to a church, and it would always play this every day until I grew up and left. I was always curious why it never stopped playing and where it was coming from. All I remember is it being on loop 24/7, maybe on like an intercom or something. So there is this kind of repetitive theme happening.
Pockable Cannon?
Yeah. This comment is so like dystopian though. Why were they playing it on loop like all the time in the daycare? It's just horrible.
Yeah.
And the last comment, which would have given it all away, was if you listen closely at the start, you can hear the collective sigh of countless musicians who play in string quartets at weddings.
Yeah, as we've discussed.
Yes.
Interesting. Well, I'll be interested to know if listener Satish can corroborate the story about this playing on Sri Lankan radio every night at 9:55. Satish, get at us.
All right, here's the second piece. I can't even begin to imagine how quickly the world would set on fire if this composer were allowed to copyright this.
If this composer were allowed to copyright this, that's a very strange thing to say because every composer does have a copyright on their music unless they're long dead.
It's something that has been maybe used extensively, you know, like let's say Mozart's Twinkle Twinkle Variations or the person who wrote Dies Irae to start with, you know.
Or maybe like Vivaldi Four Seasons or something.
Sure.
Yeah. And again, YouTube commenters probably don't know about or haven't listened to our segment about copyright law.
Yeah. Their loss. All right. Well, keep going, Kensho.
All right, second one. This one's more of a troll comment. This song saved my life. I was in a coma for 5 years, but today the nurse came in, turned this on, and I instantly woke up to just turn this shit off.
Wow.
Dang.
How rude to take the time out of your day to write that in the YouTube comment section of this piece.
Pocketball cannon?
Yeah. Right, okay. Well, I don't think either of these is overly elucidating, so
No.
lay the third one on us here.
All right. Well, this one will probably, yeah. I think the funniest part of this performance is that in the one piece that is complete silence, there is no coughing of any sort, basically proving that when audiences incessantly cough during quiet moments in pieces, it is to intentionally be disruptive.
Tiff, seems like you know it.
So 433?
Yeah.
John Cage's
John Cage, 4:33.
4 minutes and 33 seconds, which, should we explain the meaning of this to our listeners? They might not know.
Sure, it's a piece. So it's titled 4:33, yes?
It's titled
Correct.
4 minutes, 33 seconds.
4 minutes and 33 seconds of, basically it's written for any instrument or collection of instruments, and the piece is entirely silent. No one plays or does anything during that time.
Right, the
So-
music is whatever sound is created
Yes.
by the space, the audience, the ambiance, whatever.
So some of these comments are from a Berlin Philharmonic performance of it with Kirill Petrenko.
Mm-hmm.
And the performance only lasts 3 minutes and
Oh,
40
no.
something seconds. And
You
so
had one job.
there were some people that were going really crazy on the comments, being like, geez, like the tempo is so fast here, they couldn't even like stretch it out to 4 minutes and 33 seconds. So
That is funny.
yeah. All right. Last one here. Not gonna lie, it's 2 a.m. right now, and the transition from the first to second movement had me looking over my shoulder in my own apartment, hoping Maleficent or some killer wouldn't step out from my dark bedroom into the living room. Slightly terrifying, but great music. It's good to be alive. That's the last sentence.
Okay, multi-movement work with a very creepy transition between the first two movements. For whatever reason, I'm sort of on the Shostakovich train.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Like maybe the Eighth String Quartet or something along those lines. Yeah. Kensho, why don't you give us another one?
Since you're on your way, I'm going to give you this one, which shouldn't help you at all, but I just thought it was funny.
Okay.
I was too stoned when I listened to this piece. I felt literally every note, harmony, and emotion. It was almost too much for me to handle. Such torment and anguish in this piece, and such beautiful melancholy. Shit's intense, yo.
Yeah, I think I'm still thinking Shostakovich.
And then here is the last one, which is, you know those people that go through and timestamp everything?
Yeah.
So
Very
here's a
helpful.
little-
The
Yes.
saviors
little-
of YouTube.
They are savers of
Yes.
YouTube. Yeah, right.
So here's such a savior of YouTube. Quite intense though. It's titled "Reasons Why This Should Be Called the Paranoia and Death-Defying String Quartet." 9:15 scares the hell out of me, especially since I'm second violin. I guess this person plays violin. Abused E string so much you can hear it oscillate. You're gonna break your violin, dude. 11:11 sounds like footsteps of evil spirits creeping up on the composer. 13:03 dun 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 brought to a whole new level. Should probably give it away. The last one I like so much is 5:36. Transition from movement 1 to 2 brought Satan into my apartment, into my house. That's what it says. Brought Satan into my house. Send help.
Yeah, okay. So Shostakovich Eighth Quartet from your
That's right.
singing. Yeah, you,
Yep.
you gave it to us. Wow, yeah, okay. Hey, not bad.
Good job, Will.
Thanks.
Yeah, you're on a roll. That just about does it for this week's Prelude segment, but before we wrap up, we'd like to remind our listeners that we do periodic listener-generated Name That Tune rounds, so we invite you to try and stump us. Check our show notes, where you'll find a link to a form where you can upload a 30-second clip of an unidentified piece of classical music for us to try to identify. And with that, we move on to our first topic. Tiffany, what do you have for us?
The San Francisco Conservatory of Music made news in 2020 when they announced their unprecedented alliance with music talent management firm Opus 3 Artists, which we covered in episode 10 of the Classical Gabfest. Now, in a move that harkens back to that interesting acquisition, the San Francisco Conservatory has announced this month that it is now the home of Pentatone Music, a premier classical music record label founded in 2001 by former Philips Classics executives in the Netherlands. The conservatory writes, "This partnership will enable students, artists, and the public to benefit from the combined resources of a leading conservatory and a legendary label. As a trio, SFCM, Opus 3 artists, and Pentatone present an innovative platform to reimagine the model for professional music education and to invent the performance experience of the future." To kick off the formal collaboration, Pentatone plans to record and release a performance by the National Brass Ensemble during summer at SFCM's National Brass Ensemble Academy. The performance will be conducted by San Francisco Opera music director Yunsun Kim inside the Davies Symphony Hall and will include the debut of a commission by Jonathan Bingham, a winner of the Emerging Black Composers Project sponsored in part by SFCM and the San Francisco Symphony. So we are going all the way back to classical Gabfest roots here. I remember talking about this on really early on in our oeuvre. So does this make sense to you guys? I mean, we discussed about whether the Opus 3 artists arm made sense. So does this make sense?
I find it a kind of a head scratcher, quite honestly. Like, does the San Francisco Conservatory just have like endless supply of money or something? Like they're just going around.
So the press release said that this was made possible by a private donor.
Yeah, and so I mean, I'm just wondering, like, what was the pitch here? I'm just so curious to know. Like, I admit I don't really get it, and I think that a conservatory of music could spend this money in a lot of different ways to support their students and their primary mission. I don't really see what the advantage of having an in-house label that's based in the Netherlands really is. I mean, unless the label is going to be giving the San Francisco Conservatory students some kind of leg up or, present their own ensembles on the label. As, for example, like Naxos actually releases a lot of recordings by student ensembles. They release, I think it was Manhattan School of Music, that they've released a bunch of their performances, and some of the wind ensembles at American conservatories. Yeah, this seems strange to me.
It makes sense with their whatever narrative they're trying to set up with acquiring a management firm and then now acquiring a recording label. But I'm still, I'm in the same boat as well. Like, I just don't exactly understand what benefit there is. Well, specifically for Pentatone, like, it's not like they're going to release suddenly labels of student, maybe for student ensembles, if they're discovering repertoire, like it says, through this Emerging Black Composers Project, and if they're going to record those under that label, great. But I don't see how this benefits the students in any way, because it's not like the label is going to be suddenly taking somebody that's finishing school and saying, hey, let's put together a solo album, especially during these days when no one's buying CDs. It's not like they're trying to make money off of this, or they're going to have some kind of success with this in whatever financial success, I mean.
The executive director of Pentatone is on record here saying that there are changes happening in the recording industry that make this move make sense to them. Do either of you guys know what they're talking about? I mean, do we know if? I mean, I think we're all aware that sales of classical records are not particularly hot in general. I guess I'd be curious to know whether Pentatone was struggling or to find a broader base or a standard platform. That's my first thought. And then the second thought I had is, from the conservatory angle, there is one angle in which this does make a lot of sense, which is that while performance degree programs across the country are really struggling, a really hot major across the country now is music production. Administrations love this. They think that the next big thing for young kids these days is just getting them into the recording studio and, getting them to make beeps and boops. And it's a really administration-friendly kind of shiny investment to make, even though I think a lot of schools are discovering that it is kind of a boondoggle, actually, because you have to shell out a bunch of money, right, to create a recording studio and blah, 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 all of this. And frankly, most schools, traditional musicians are not really equipped to set up a recording studio. So maybe that's an angle in which this makes sense to be able to have. And frankly, there's a plenty robust track record of universities housing like book publishing arms. And so in the audio world, this is sort of, it reads similarly to me. I don't know.
But why then like the label though? Because you could hire very qualified people to just set up a recording department or some kind of music production arm at the conservatory. Is it just the brand or?
There's the brand issue, and then there's also the sense of, the reason that it's a little bit tricky to set up these kinds of recording majors in a traditional music school is because people who work in that industry or people who have the expertise to set up a recording studio are generally working in the industry, period. They're not interested in teaching students and give me music 101, or even music recording 101, they don't want to teach that stuff. So, it's not the easiest thing to get somebody who's good at classroom teaching and be able to set up a recording studio and know the ins and outs and the equipment and stuff. So from the angles that I have had the presence in the last few years, this does kind of make sense, especially if you want, I don't know, I would say San Francisco is one of the leading, right, conservatories in the country.
Okay, hold on. Let me say something about all of this, which is that, first of all, the San Francisco Conservatory already, they have a recording studio. That was one of the things that was mentioned in one of these articles, is that they have this great recording space already. So it makes sense. And I'm sure that they have technicians on hand to record. And I actually think that it's tremendously valuable for students. I think that every student musician should have to take Recording Engineering 101. I really do. If you're going to have to be making your own recordings to apply to jobs or to just put your stuff online on YouTube, maybe self-produce an album. Not that anybody's really doing albums anymore these days. I think it is really a valuable hands-on practical thing. And plus it's something, it's another sideline that you could use to have an income stream. Get yourself a few mics, and if you know how to, record well, and you can make a little studio pretty easily these days, I think that should be required, quite frankly. But I don't think that Pentatone is going to be sending over their engineers from the Netherlands. Maybe I'm wrong about that. I don't know.
Why not?
Because there's people already in San Francisco at this conservatory who are doing this stuff. So maybe they will. Maybe there will be some collaboration with that.
If you're talking about the cost of an extra airplane ticket, these people don't think anything of that.
Yeah, no.
It's much more worth it to them to have somebody that they have a relationship with, know and trust, and then they'll just buy a freaking plane ticket and they'll fly back and forth between this side of the world and that 3 times in a week.
Yes, I'm sure, and sure they might well do that, but it's just usually when these labels are sending somebody, they're sending a producer rather than an engineer. They're sending somebody to supervise the session.
Sure.
And these days, when they have these, I think we talked about this one time. I did a recording sort of, I think it was August 2020. So this was pandemic time where, nobody's getting on planes and stuff. This was in Czechia. This was another of these Eastern European recording things. And they piped into me a very high quality audio feed. There was no lag. They have this technology now. So I produced that session sitting in my studio in Seattle at 3 o'clock in the morning. So, that can also be done. I'm not saying that they're not going to send somebody over. I'm sure that they will now that they've got this thing. But in terms of also the question about there are changes in the recording industry that make this make sense for Pentatone, they're probably running out of money. And if some, American educational institution is going to say okay, we'll buy you, I'm sure they're all for it.
There's also I guess there's a branch of knowledge about how to record that's not necessarily how to make the recording, but how to be the person recording. So I think as a musician, there's a mentality, there's drink enough water, all this stuff that you do to make successful recordings and pace yourself mentally and all that, because we know that recording is a different game than performing is, frankly. So that also may be a source of, easy experience, I suppose, for SFCM students. What about this? I don't know. This kind of rubbed me the wrong way. The president of SFCM is calling this kind of 3-armed thing his culture of achievement. What the heck is going on?
Well, it kind of points to a certain trend that we're experiencing, not just in music, but with just everything else, where it's just kind of like, if we can hang a medal around someone's neck, then therefore they're certified as good. And so it's like, well, if we have Opus 3 and this person's managed by Opus 3 and has a label out in Pentatone, they must be amazing. Therefore, SFCM is also amazing. This is where these are where all my questions are. It's like, okay, what is this ecosystem that they're creating now? And like, how does this all work, right? So culture of achievement is probably the most BS thing that I think I've heard today. But
it's his culture of achievement. He achieved buying these two big companies and building the brand of SFCM. But I don't know. I look, it's probably too early to say about any of this. I mean, maybe we'll all be eating our words in 3 or 4 years when, the pipeline from SFCM to management to their first, solo recording debut is happening, and like all of their students are taking the world by storm. I don't know, but
to that point, Will, I guess the thing that worries me the most about this, which is the same thing that worried me about the Opus 3 acquisition, is like, okay, so you're setting up a pipeline, and like in economic terms, you're setting up your like monopoly. And that just doesn't smell right to me. Like, if you're going to bill yourself as something that is centered on excellence and, giving equal opportunities and these kinds of things, this, the kind of thorough integration, which I understand from a professional level. One of the criticisms about schools, and maybe music schools in particular, is we want school to prepare us for the real world, the world that lies beyond. And, the world that lies beyond for the most successful classical artists involves getting managed and making recordings. Hey, makes sense on that paper. But if you're going to, bill yourself as the sort of intake, professionalizing impact on high schoolers, frankly, it doesn't make sense to like take them in and then put them into this giant machinery that is just then going to kind of like feed on itself incestuously. Like, that's what doesn't smell right about this to me.
Yeah, I think they're making a pipeline of disappointment, if you want my...
You think so? You think it's not actually going to result in good projects?
Well, it's like you say, Tiffany. They're advertising this to high schoolers. And how many people who walk through the doors of San Francisco Conservatory as a first-year student...
Ready for management.
Yeah, right. Are ready for this, are going to be ready for it by the time they leave. And then even of the ones who are ready for it, how many of them are actually going to get this, are going to be offered this pathway?
And sorry, but those that are ready for it are probably going to Curtis and Juilliard or Colburn. They're just, it's just this kind of like shiny lights that they're hanging around this conservatory to get people to kind of come into it. But yeah, it's going to be a disappointment for a student that thinks that like suddenly if they get into SFCM that they're going to be managed and then they have a recording deal as well, right?
Oh, well, we'll see. Do we see, is there another step in the commercial music business that makes sense for their SFCM's next acquisition?
Oh, God. The San Francisco Symphony, perhaps?
Yeah, when it can't sell any more tickets.
I think the next step is like, producing, musical NFTs and...
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
There's like a digital specialist, a digital music specialization.
Yes. Good point.
Something to do. Apple.
Yeah, by Apple computers.
Prime Phonic. Yeah. Whatever happened to that? Well, whenever it happens, you can be sure we'll cover it here on the Classical Gabfest. Well, let's go to Will for our second topic of the day.
For our second topic today, we're going to discuss a video compilation simply titled The Worst Classical Performances of All Time that uploaded to YouTube, perhaps not surprisingly, on April 1st of this year. The video title probably sounds pretty self-explanatory and perhaps kind of mean-spirited, and in a way it is, but it's more nuanced than that because of the way that the video is put together. The video mainly features performances by contestants in televised beauty pageants, and we'd be remiss if we didn't listen to a clip.
Oh my God.
So what I mean by the nuance bit is that the video creator has included commentary captions that are pretty hilarious, but also show a genuine appreciation for the moments where the quote-unquote musicians manage to carry something off, and also get into some of the weird life choices and contexts that led these performances to see the light of day. So what did you guys think? Was this too mean, or was it just hilarious?
I'm not sure that I thought this was as stimulating or hilarious as the narrator thought it was. For me, it was just oh boy, this is just kind of depressing.
It's the kind of fodder for people that really like to hate on performances just for the technical elements or whatever. It's I don't know. I mean, but do you? I mean, I just don't understand. I guess it's just I'm not that person that would spend so much time putting together a compilation of fails like this and enjoy putting that together and think that's good content. But I mean, there's a lot of time put into this, right? With all the little transitions and text and all that.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the bigger questions that it raises are so obviously this is a thing that happens in beauty pageants. There's this talent section, and some percentage of the contestants are going to perform classical pieces, either on the piano or the violin, typically, it seems, as their talent. And in one case, there is a contestant who appears in multiple different pageants, and every time she plays the piano, and she's just pawing away at this thing. I mean, just totally incoherently. This is not just pointing out a technical foible or two. This is what is going on here? And that's the question. What is going on here? How could you exist in this world where you're doing this multiple times and nobody steps up and says, hey, is there any other talents that are lurking there? I mean, you really think that this is working for you? And I wonder if any of these people have ever won the beauty pageant after these talent competitions.
I mean, I think the thing that must pump the brakes on one person, or frankly any of us, stepping up to say to this person, this is not good, is you can hear it, the recordings of the reaction of the crowd at the end of each one of these performances. This is they go freaking wild. And it's all right, if they like it and it works for you, you do you, I guess.
Yeah, that's one of my big takeaways from this whole thing, and actually something that I think that well-trained musicians should learn about is that you can really sell a lot with confidence. I mean, they just bamming kitten paws all over the piano, and then they just leap up with a big smile on their face and take a bow to this huge applause. And it's I don't know, I've just seen so many performances where a performer will miss one note in a big solo, right? And then it's comes time to take their bow and they have the most dour look on their face, and they're they offended the gods of classical music, and they take this very apologetic bow towards the audience. And it's no. Just you gotta fake it till you make it here,
Sorry, I'm just watching these. As you were talking about these people leaping up from their pianos after each performance, I'm yeah, it's true. We never do that, really. But in a way, I guess as conductors, I feel we have to, in a way, we have to be that kind of energy, even if you feel a performance is hasn't been the greatest, because you still have to kind of put your best face up there. So maybe we're the beauty pageant people of the performer world.
Yeah, of course we are. But Kensho, haven't you ever conducted a performance where then somebody has a solo, they biffed something, and then there's always this sort of question: is are you still going to give them the solo bow? Do they want it anymore? But then you give it to them, and then they have this very mousy look on their face, and they don't want to smile or.
Yeah. I mean, I guess this in a way kind of ties into the next segment too, about kind of calling out individual members of the orchestra, or drawing attention to individual members of the orchestra. It's true. I think that there are people that are very sheepish about this, especially if they feel like they haven't performed well that day, or it might not even be anything about that, but just something going on in their lives. But yeah, I mean, there is something to be kind of appreciated about just the energy of, no matter how badly it goes, the way you receive applause and the way you show energy at the end of a performance, no matter what, I think I guess I can get behind that.
I guess if there is an angle of these comments that does really strike home, it's his comments on self-awareness. I mean, it's not so much, why hasn't anybody else told these people that they should not be on stage playing like some of the hardest repertoire. But it's whether, like, how can they themselves have poured, really, I mean, every one of these people is, at least the piano folks, they're better pianists than I am. That is a true statement. And yet, there's no way that I don't know, there apparently is a way that you pour however many hours it took you to get yourself to that point, and have no idea or like think that it doesn't matter somehow that you are not doing anything close to even basic accuracy. Like, that's the part that's really stunning.
I feel like in these pageants, it's more about like, what are your interests? And they just kind of say that it's a talent. So then when you think about it that way, it's like, oh, I'm interested in playing the piano. Like, if someone were just to be watching you, like, I
just want somebody to get up there and be like, I love finger painting.
Yeah. I mean, I think in these pageants, it's more about how you look in a swimsuit. And
Sure. But there is this kind of fake of like, oh, like, let's explore the depths of your personality.
Yeah, like how well-rounded you
right.
are.
So
yeah, I know,
maybe you shouldn't call it a talent. Just be like, hobbies or something. I guess once you, but it's like when you, the whole thing, the pageant itself is a performance. So of course, anything you do on that stage is now treated as a performance. And then we have so many associations as classical musicians about, oh, what does a performance mean in terms of a classical performance? Rather than looking at this being like, well, this person has some interest in playing whatever instrument. Maybe that's okay.
That's true.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if it's okay or not. I mean, like, well, just because I mean, in the larger sense, like, is a beauty pageant really like an okay thing for our society to be holding up?
Well, that of course, like, we can get into that, but that might be another whole segment on another podcast.
Yeah, amen to that. All right. Well, listeners, this does have its amusing moments and sort of unbelievable moments as well. And I found some of the text underlay commentary kind of funny or interesting, and maybe you will too. I don't know. Give it a watch, give it a listen, and let us know what you think. Are beauty pageants okay? That's what we want to hear from you. Reach out to us at classicalgabfest@gmail.com. All right, Kensho, let's go on to our third topic today.
Could orchestral musicians develop independent social media followings akin to players on a major sports team, and thus create a whole new paradigm for promoting the institutions they work for? That's the concept explored in a recent online talk by Aubrey Bergauer and David Taylor. Aubrey is someone we've mentioned before on this podcast, the data-driven former executive of the California Symphony, who developed new paradigms for growing audiences and revenue at that institution over the course of just a few years. David Taylor is a British marketing consultant for a variety of orchestras. These two individuals are now leading members of the incredibly niche classical music executive consultant influencer space, which is perhaps something we'll talk about in this segment. But first, let's look at this theory. Should orchestras be providing their musicians and administrators with tools, coaching, and perhaps even funding to build their personal online brands?
I'm skeptical about this, if I'm being honest. I mean, I think that the reason that sports figures develop these big online followings is because a lot of people like sports. The sports people are like much more celebrities. It's not to say that members of a symphony orchestra can't be local celebrities of a sort to a certain cohort, but I have found that cohort is not very online. I don't know that there is much demand for this kind of thing. Now, in the Seattle Symphony, there is a cellist who is very online and very social media forward, and he did that all before he got hired by the symphony. And, he continues to do that, and that's great. And I'm sure that the Seattle Symphony is happy to reap the benefits from that. But not everybody has that drive or ambition or interest. And I don't know. The more that I look at social media in general, the more I see like a barren wasteland, And so I just don't know if this is the move now. This could have been the move in like 2012 for an orchestra to like have a budget for their musicians to like really springboard their brand enterprise. But I don't know. That's just where I think about it.
Yeah, the way that you've put it just now, where it could have been the right move 10 years ago, that's interesting to me, Will, because I have often this feeling about social media, which is that by hating it as much as I do, that I'm the dinosaur. And so, for it to be like, oh, maybe being all into social media was so 10 years ago, that's funny because it makes me feel hip all of a sudden. But the upshot of it is that I'm on the same page as you, Will. I feel like social media is net evil for our society. I just don't feel like there's anything that I think is truly redeeming to the point where I would rather do it than not do it. And yet, of the couple arms of this podcast, for example, the one that we shell out and ask somebody else to do is social media. Like, we recognize that it is something that you have to groom because it is an arm of general media, right? General public relations. That makes sense, and public relations is not going away. That as a general arm and social media as a subset of that, okay, sure. But it's always going to be the thing that I'm extremely willing to pay somebody else to do for me, because there are people who seem to love it so much that it makes no sense whatsoever for me to expend energy on it.
I guess coming from my own experience of this, like if I go to a certain orchestra or a festival like I'm at right now, they always kind of ask if there is content that they're putting out that involves me, then it's like, oh, please share it through your own social media so that we can kind of propagate it and kind of reach followers, like my own followers that maybe don't follow that certain orchestra or festival. They might be led toward this. And there is this kind of like symbiosis in the social media world where that occurs. I know, in fact, this kind of thinking, going back to just kind of developing or kind of showcasing individual musicians' personalities, is definitely a shift has happened definitely in the Philadelphia Orchestra side. If you go check out their social media, they do these like musician minutes where they do like a little like minute video of like individual musicians, and then they usually tag them on social media, and that gets kind of shared throughout. I think that, like Will, you said, like there are just certain people that are not gonna do this or are not gonna be good on camera, good on any kind of social media related content. But I think there are people, as orchestras get slightly younger as we go forward, this is going to be something that I think people will be doing. And I think I do see the benefit of it, but it has to, especially right now, the version that it is right now, I think orchestras have to be kind of targeted in who they train or who they ask to do. But I also think that in interacting with audience members, they are interested in different people. I know there's many people that actually even like complain when the roster of the orchestra isn't updated on the program based on each piece. Some people have come up to me and say, oh, why don't they tell us when, the associate principal trumpet is playing the concerto? They kind of want to know like who's playing what, because of course in an orchestra there are moments where people have solos, and if someone is inspired or moved by that solo, they would kind of like to know more about that person. So I think there is an interest in getting to know people individually. If that has to be all in social media, I'm not exactly sure, because there are other ways of getting that person to be known by the people that are coming every week, right? Like involving them in a pre-concert lecture or stuff like that doesn't involve someone learning how to use Instagram, let's say. So is this the only answer to kind of getting people to build their own brand? No, but obviously this is where we are heading in the future, I think. So I wouldn't poo-poo it as hard as you do, I guess.
Well, okay, that's interesting. Some points there, Kensho. I mean, for one thing, I am one of those people who I would love it if there was just like a program insert that told me who the personnel was for every piece. I mean, in the way that people like, follow their baseball cards, right? And like, who's like batting today. And who's playing second base. These are things, right?
Yeah, I mean, as stiffly as you delivered that comment, it was believable. So let's just continue.
So yeah, I mean, then you're knowing who they are, because like you want to know who they are in terms of what they are doing on stage. You want to know like who's actually doing the performances. I'm very interested in that. And actually, I think that could be a very good use of social media, would be to like, tweet out, what are the rosters for the concerto and the overture and the symphony. Like I would be super interested in knowing that. But, it's just like orchestras are so manicured. They're so like worried about like their public image. And if the thing that you want from social media is an authentic way to get to know like people as people and see like what they're interested in. I just see like, these namby-pamby administrators getting very nervous about this kind of stuff. And that's the other thing. It's like one thing I thought was interesting in this talk was they said that, I guess David Taylor had initiated something like this at the Philharmonia Orchestra in London. And he said that I think that they got 9 musicians to take them up, and seven of them had never had any social media presence. What a godsend, right? I mean, to start somebody from scratch and not have all of their bad tweets to go back and look through. I mean, that can be dangerous, And so if you're our social media manager, are you really going to go back through everybody's Instagram posts? If you've got like some 23-year-old flute player who just got it and they've had Instagram since they were 13 and they might have a bunch of dumb old stuff on there. Like, are you going to tell them to go back and delete everything? I mean, this just turns into like a big, if it has the imprimatur of the institution, then, you're taking on some extra responsibilities there and some extra dangers.
That's an interesting, I'm going to look at that, the same challenge, Will, that you raised from a different angle, which is I don't like the bleed of the institution into one's personal life either. Like, I don't like the idea that by becoming a member of the symphony, I was recently asked, as the result of an invitation to conduct a group. Oh, please like us. I received a PR list of things to do. Obviously send headshot and bio. Fine. Like us on Facebook. Like us on Instagram. Like us on Twitter. I don't have 2 of those 3 accounts. Okay, first of all, and so what if I do? I don't like the implication that by standing with somebody on stage, that means that I need to integrate my personal life with the institution. I don't like it.
Yeah, I think there's a shift there where obviously this goes without saying, but I find that social media, especially like Facebook now, is no longer a personal thing anymore. Like it's just people are using it exactly for this reason and nothing else. There are influencers, of course, that are basically sharing their personal lives as part of their content, but it's much more directed toward like, oh, okay, like this is my business, like my personal life is my business. I mean, that's why people have multiple Instagram accounts, right? They have their, that's like the whole close friends feature now, right? You can just share it to close friends and no one else can see what's going on. And then there's your professional page. And I think the people people run into issues when those things bleed. I agree, Tiffany. And I think that's what we saw. I don't know if you remember, but during the pandemic with BLM protests and stuff like that, there are a number of musicians that were fired from orchestras for their posts on social media.
We talked about some of them on this podcast.
Yes. So obviously, that kind of training probably is necessary, but also I think that it goes without saying that people probably wouldn't ask that particular person to be their kind of brand ambassador through their own social media. So,
but that also gets back to what Will was saying, which is like, if what you're looking for from social media is this like authentic connecting to somebody personally, and then all they're going to see on institutional accounts is this like kind of bland, whitewashed, happy to announce, thrilled, look at my office stuff, which I can't stand and actively avoid, then like, okay, where are we really going with all this? Like, it just all seems like a swirling toilet bowl of mediocrity, frankly.
I would loop in authentic social media content along with the BS that is the culture of achievement that we just talked about in the last segment. So, authenticity is I think is just something that isn't really gonna, I don't know. I think it's a complete misnomer in terms of stuff on social media.
Well, a lot of thoughts there. I'll just finish this segment by saying, listeners, we certainly encourage you to follow the Classical Gabfest on all of the social media platforms. There could be no better use of those platforms than that. I think that one thing that's becoming, strangely enough, is becoming new again, and it's a growth area in the world of not exactly social media, but just the online world of like promotion and PR and community building, is newsletters. They're having a big resurgence. And that is one thing that I've thought about for the Classical Gabfest, is having a weekly newsletter, which would basically just be a copy paste of our show notes, but it would go to your inbox. Because I know for a fact that like a lot of people listen to our show when they're, on a walk or driving, they can't, and they might find something interesting, maybe about something that we're saying, or more likely something that we've talked about, or they want to watch a video or a concert or a performance or read an article that we've referred to. And, once the podcast is over, like it deletes from your phone and you don't think like, it's a lot of extra effort to go back and find the show notes and stuff. So, just having the show notes essentially in your inbox is something that I've thought about doing. So listeners, if that is something that you're interested in, do reach out to us in either on email or social media and let us know if that's something that you would like us to institute. But with that, I think it's time to move on to our final segment, our classical mixtape. Tiffany.
In our classical mixtape, we each recommend some music that's caught our ear this week to share with our listeners. So, Will, what do you have this week?
All right, I'm really going to throw you guys for a loop here. This is...
what is this?
Yeah, okay, so this is an hour-long guitar and voice song cycle by a German-Kurdish contemporary composer named Ralf Yusuf Gawlick, and it's called Kollwitz-Konnex. I know this is like the last thing anybody would ever expect me to like or listen to or endorse or recommend.
No, it's the very thing that I would expect you to listen to.
Really? That's surprising. But it's really good. It's very beautiful. Here's a little clip. I just found that this had a very interesting contemporary musical language, and I don't think that we do guitar music, classical guitar, hardly at all on this show. And so I just thought it would be something a little different, something interesting.
Really cool. And I also don't associate the German language with something that is sung with guitar either. So I will check this out, actually.
Yeah.
All right. Kensho, take us forward.
I am very much in opera Puccini land doing a bohème here at the Spoleto Festival USA. So I am recommending a string piece that he wrote, Crisantemi. This is performed by the London Symphony Orchestra, conducted by Antonio Papano.
Have you ever conducted this, Kensho?
No, I want to.
Have you, Tiff?
Yeah, it was actually one of my first conducting experiences.
Huh.
And do you find that the piece comes off in performance? Because I find it very beautiful to listen to, but every performance I've been to has fallen flat, I would say.
I kind of agree. I mean, it was first of all, it was so long ago, and it was with a youth orchestra group and like a second string youth orchestra group, so I can't really speak one way or to another to the veracity. My feeling is that you have to kind of keep it moving. You have to move it like suddenly at some. I mean, because otherwise, you're right. It does sort of like just sit there for a long time.
It's just so like beautiful. It's nothing but like beautiful. But then maybe there are some dramatic opportunities in there because it is written by this great dramatist of.
Yeah, and you have to think of it like an opera. Cool. Well, I went to a similar well for this week. This is the Rigoletto Quartet, Verdi, and this is from an old performance, Carol Van Ness, Dolores Ziegler, Pavarotti, and Alan Titus, conducted by Emerson Buckley in a gala performance. So it's a non-staged performance of the quartet. There's just some unbelievable singing in this. I kind of stumbled across it this week, and it's just like, oh man, it's like such good old school singing. It's just really quality.
piangere non vale. Taci, taci, che piangere non
You'll find the links to all these and to our full classical mixtape playlist in the show notes.
And with that, it's time to wrap up this episode of the Classical Gabfest. I'm William White, and on behalf of Tiffany Liu and Kensho Watanabe, I'd like to thank you so much for listening and to encourage you, yes, to subscribe and rate us on your podcast app. We'd love your help spreading the word about the show on social media, where you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, even on close friends' Instagram. You can reach us at classicalgabfest@gmail.com, and we'd love to hear from you. Until next time, happy listening, and we'll be with you next week.
Did we just get a little bit of Willie's White there at the end?